"We don't serve your kind here." The words sliced through the air of elite fitness, leaving a silence that seemed to swallow the mechanical hum of treadmills and the clinking of weights. James Wilson, 22 years of military service and a Purple Heart recipient, stood frozen at the entrance, his weathered gym bag clutched in one hand, membership confirmation email in the other. The manager's voice had been just loud enough for nearby members to hear. Sleek bodies in designer workout gear turning to stare, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and uncomfortable recognition of the scene unfolding. What they couldn't see was how those 6 words had reopened wounds deeper than the shrapnel scars hidden beneath James's faded army t-shirt. In the corner of the gym, partially obscured by a row of gleaming machines, a muscular figure paused mid-rep, his attention caught by the confrontation. Through the mirror's reflection, his eyes narrowed, taking in every detail of the unfolding scene. Elite Fitness wasn't just a gym. It was a status symbol nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills, where monthly memberships cost more than most people's rent. Chrome and glass gleamed under strategic lighting, while motivational quotes in gold lettering adorned walls of pristine white. The manager, Trevor Mason, stood with perfect posture in his tailored black suit, manicured fingers adjusting designer glasses as he looked down at James. "There must be some misunderstanding," he continued, voice dripping with practiced courtesy that did nothing to mask his disdain. "Your application must have been approved in error. We cater to a certain clientele." He gestured vaguely at James's appearance, the slight limp from a battlefield injury, the simple clothes, the military short gray hair, everything that made him visibly different from the polished crowd moving through their routines, pretending not to watch. Several members nodded in silent agreement with Trevor, while others simply turned away, uncomfortable witnesses to the humiliation of a man who had once been willing to die for their freedom. James's weathered hands tightened around the strap of his gym bag. His doctor had recommended this place specifically for its state-of-the-art rehabilitation equipment that could help him regain the strength in his leg after 3 surgeries, equipment he had saved for months to access. "I paid the same as everyone else," he said quietly, dignity intact despite the public rejection. Trevor's smile tightened as he reached for the security button beneath the counter. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The tension in the air thickened, spreading across the gym floor like a toxic cloud. No one moved to intervene. No one spoke up. It was just another day in a world where worth was measured by appearance and bank accounts rather than character or sacrifice. Then came the sound of weights being re-racked with deliberate force, a metallic crash that cut through the uncomfortable silence. Heavy footsteps approached from behind the reception desk, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. The man who had been watching from the corner emerged into full view, his massive frame impossible to ignore. Those familiar with movies would instantly recognize Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, though in this moment there was nothing performative about the look in his eyes. Trevor's expression transformed when he noticed the approaching figure. Recognition, shock, and then a desperate attempt to maintain composure, all flashing across his face in quick succession. The gym members who had been pretending not to stare now abandoned all pretense, some fumbling for phones, others frozen mid-exercise. Dwayne Johnson moved with purpose, his presence commanding the space in a way that had nothing to do with his celebrity status and everything to do with the controlled intensity radiating from him. James stood his ground, unaware of who had approached, his focus still on Trevor, and the humiliation burning through him. He had faced Taliban fighters with less anxiety than he felt now, standing out of place in this temple to privilege and superficial perfection. Problem here? Johnson's deep voice carried across the now silent gym, the question simple but loaded with meaning. His gaze shifted between Trevor and James, taking in the veteran's stance, the subtle compensation for his injured leg, the proud set of his shoulders despite the discomfort evident in his eyes. Johnson had encountered men like James before, warriors whose battles didn't end when they returned home, who carried invisible weights far heavier than anything in this gym. He recognized something in the older man that the manager, with all his curated sophistication, had completely missed: genuine strength. Trevor's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, fingers nervously adjusting his tie. "No problem at all, Mr. Johnson. I was just explaining to this gentleman that there might be more suitable facilities for his needs." "His needs?" Johnson repeated, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. He crossed his arms over his chest, biceps stretching the fabric of his Under Armour shirt. The movement wasn't intended to intimidate, but the effect was undeniable. Trevor shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how the power dynamic in the room had changed. The gym members, who had been so certain of their place in the hierarchy moments ago, now watched with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, recognizing the moral drama unfolding before them. "I'm just trying to maintain the atmosphere our members expect," Trevor explained, his voice taking on a placating tone. "Elite fitness has certain standards." "Standards," Johnson cut him off, the single word carrying weight. He turned to James, extending his hand. "Dwayne Johnson." James took the offered hand, his grip firm despite his surprise. "James Wilson, 10th Mountain Division." Johnson nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Afghanistan?" "And Iraq. 3 tours." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Phones were raised higher, capturing the interaction. The story was already taking shape in texts and social media posts. The Rock confronting elitism, standing up for a veteran. But for the men at the center of it, this wasn't about creating content. It was about something far more fundamental. Johnson turned back to Trevor, who was now visibly sweating, despite the gym's perfect climate control. "So what exactly makes someone unsuitable for your gym?" Johnson asked, his tone conversational, but with an edge that cut through Trevor's corporate polish. Trevor glanced around, suddenly aware that he had become the villain in this narrative. "It's not personal," he insisted, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. "Elite Fitness maintains exclusive memberships to provide an optimal environment. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere." The words sounded hollow even to his own ears, stripped of their usual veneer by Johnson's direct question. "Atmosphere," Johnson repeated, letting the pretension of the word hang in the air. He surveyed the gym, the members in their color-coordinated outfits, the pristine equipment, the smoothie bar staffed by aspiring actors. Then he looked back at James, taking in the man's steady gaze and the way he stood, despite the pain Trevor had so dismissively referenced. "Tell me about your injury," he said to James, ignoring Trevor completely now. James hesitated, unused to having attention directed his way. "IED outside Kandahar. Shattered my femur, damaged the knee, 3 surgeries. Doctor said this place has the best rehabilitation equipment in the city." His voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of self-pity. Johnson nodded, turning back to Trevor with newfound intensity. The gym had fallen so silent that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Even those who had been recording the confrontation lowered their phones slightly, caught up in the raw authenticity of the moment. There was something happening beyond celebrity intervention, a collision of worlds and values that touched on something deeper than viral content. "Atmosphere," Johnson said again, the repetition transforming the word into an indictment. "Let me tell you what I see when I look around this gym." Johnson took a step closer to Trevor, his voice lowered, but still carrying through the hushed gym. "I see a lot of expensive equipment and not nearly enough heart. I see people who come here to be seen rather than to truly push themselves." His gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with several members who quickly looked away. "I see people who think the price of their membership somehow makes them better than a man who put his life on the line for their freedom." Trevor's professional smile had completely disappeared, replaced by a thin-lipped expression of someone realizing they've made a tactical error. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps we could discuss this privately in my office." "No," Johnson cut him off. "We're going to have this conversation right here, because this gentleman was embarrassed right here, in front of everyone." He gestured to the watching crowd. Nobody stepped up. Nobody said a word. A woman in designer leggings lowered her gaze. A muscular executive who had been nodding along with Trevor earlier now found the floor fascinating. The collective shame was palpable, hanging in the air like the scent of disinfectant and expensive cologne. James shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble. I can find somewhere else." "You're not causing trouble," Johnson assured him, placing a hand on the veteran's shoulder. "And you're not going anywhere." He turned to address the entire gym now, his voice projected with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. "When I was a kid, my family struggled. There were times we couldn't pay rent, times when we had nothing. I know what it's like to not fit in, to have doors closed in your face because people judge your worth by your appearance or your bank account." The revelation hung in the air. Most of the members knew Johnson's success story, but hearing him speak about his humble beginnings in this temple of privilege created a cognitive dissonance that was impossible to ignore. The contrast between the man who had earned everything through sweat and determination and the environment that sold exclusivity as its primary feature was stark. Trevor attempted to regain control. "Mr. Johnson, we value your membership and your presence here. I'm sure we can accommodate Mr. Wilson as a special exception." "Exception?" Johnson's eyebrows raised, his voice containing a dangerous calm. "That's exactly the problem. You're missing the point entirely." He shook his head, turning to face James fully. "This man shouldn't be an exception. If anything, people like him should be the standard you measure others against." James stood straighter, something shifting in his expression, pride replacing the humiliation that had been there moments before. Not because a celebrity was defending him, but because someone was acknowledging the value of his service in a world that had largely forgotten it. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, removing her wireless earbuds. "He's right," she said, her voice breaking the spectator silence. "My brother served in Afghanistan. He came home different." She looked directly at James. "Thank you for your service, sir." Her words seemed to break a spell. Another member stepped forward, a middle-aged man in expensive workout gear. "My father was in Vietnam. I've heard his stories." He turned to Trevor. "This isn't right, man." Trevor's face flushed as the tide of public opinion turned against him. His eyes darted to the security button beneath the counter, then back to Johnson, calculating his options. The situation was spiraling beyond his control, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. "Elite Fitness has policies." "Policies?" Johnson interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. "Let me tell you something about policies. They're created by people. They can be changed by people." He gestured around the gym. "Look at this place. You've got equipment worth millions, trainers with advanced degrees, nutrition experts, recovery specialists. You've created this amazing facility and then decided to restrict it to people who already have every advantage in life." The truth of his words resonated through the space. Even those who had been uncomfortable with the confrontation were now listening intently, unable to deny the moral clarity of Johnson's argument. "You know what builds real strength?" Johnson continued, his voice shifting into a tone reminiscent of his most inspirational roles, but with an authenticity that couldn't be scripted. "It's not just lifting weights. It's overcoming obstacles. It's pushing through pain. It's getting knocked down and getting back up." He looked pointedly at James's leg. "It's fighting to recover when most people would give up." The gym members exchanged glances, many nodding in silent acknowledgement. Trevor remained frozen behind the counter, watching as his authority diminished with each passing moment. Johnson moved closer to the counter, leaning in slightly as he addressed Trevor. I want to know exactly what part of your policy says a decorated veteran isn't good enough for this gym." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Trevor swallowed hard, trapped by his own words and the public nature of the confrontation. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Johnson pressed, not allowing the manager to retreat into corporate doublespeak. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you took one look at this man and decided he didn't belong here based on nothing but appearance." The accusation hung in the air, impossible to deny. Trevor's gaze dropped, unable to maintain eye contact. James cleared his throat. "I don't need special treatment," he said quietly but firmly. "Just the same respect as anyone else who paid for a membership." His simple statement cut through the tension, highlighting the fundamental injustice at the heart of the situation. The dignity in his voice reminded everyone present that this wasn't about celebrity intervention or viral moments. It was about basic human decency. More gym members had gathered now, workout routines abandoned as they were drawn into the unfolding drama. A personal trainer stepped forward, her professional demeanor momentarily set aside. "I'd be honored to work with you, sir," she said to James. "I've had specialized training and rehabilitation for combat injuries." An older man in expensive workout clothes approached, addressing James directly. "My son is deployed right now. I'd like to buy you a yearly membership." He turned to Trevor, challenge in his eyes. "If that's permitted." The tide had turned completely. What had begun as one man's humiliation was transforming into something else entirely, a moment of collective reckoning about values and worth. People who had been passive observers minutes ago were now actively engaging, finding their voices. Trevor looked desperately around the gym, seeking allies and finding none. The very clients he had been trying to protect from James's presence were now standing against him, a united front of unexpected solidarity. Even his staff had begun to distance themselves, recognizing which way the moral compass was pointing. Johnson watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction before turning back to Trevor. "So what's it going to be?" he asked, his tone making it clear this was more than a question about one man's gym membership. This was about what kind of place elite fitness was going to be, what kind of people they all chose to be. Trevor's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his designer glasses, a nervous habit betraying his crumbling composure. The pristine lobby of elite fitness had transformed into an impromptu arena of public judgment, with him at its center. "Mr. Johnson," he began, forcing confidence into his voice, "we value all potential members, but our facilities are designed for—" "For what?" Johnson interrupted, his patience visibly exhausted. "For people who look a certain way? For people who can afford to drop thousands on workout gear before they even touch a weight?" He gestured toward James. "This man survived combat. He pushed his body to limits you, and I can only imagine. And now he's fighting to rebuild his strength. Tell me who deserves access to the best equipment more than him." The question hung in the air, unanswerable. A few phones recorded the exchange, but most had been lowered as the reality of the moment sank in. This wasn't entertainment. It was a moral crucible. "Our corporate policy," Trevor tried again, clinging to the shield of bureaucracy. Johnson shook his head, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear about policy. I want to hear you, Trevor Mason. Tell this man why he isn't welcome here." He emphasized the manager's name, stripping away the corporate anonymity, making this personal. Trevor's face flushed deeper. "I never said he wasn't welcome." "You said, and I quote, 'We don't serve your kind here,'" James interjected quietly, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his eyes. "I've heard those words before, in different contexts. They never mean anything good." A hushed murmur swept through the gathered crowd. Several people who had been on the fence now shifted decisively, moving closer to James, their body language a clear statement of support. Johnson took a step back, surveying the scene with the calculated awareness of someone who understood the power of a moment. "You know what's interesting about gyms?" he asked, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent facility. "They're supposed to be places where we push past our limits, where we become better than we were yesterday." His gaze swept across the watching members. "But what's the point of physical strength without moral strength? What's the point of looking good if you can't face yourself in the mirror?" The question resonated through the space, bouncing off chrome and glass to settle in the conscience of everyone present. Johnson stepped closer to Trevor, his voice lowering but still perfectly audible in the hushed gym. "I grew up with nothing, man. I know what it's like to be judged by your appearance, your bank account, your zip code. I promised myself that if I ever made it, I'd never forget where I came from." His words carried the weight of lived experience, transforming what could have been a performative confrontation into something deeply authentic. Success isn't about what you gain. It's about what you do with it. It's about who you lift up along the way. A woman with a designer water bottle wiped away a tear. A muscular executive in premium workout gear nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. The staff members exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the truth in Johnson's words. Trevor's professional facade had crumbled completely now, revealing the insecurity beneath. "I was just following the business model," he said, his voice smaller. "The exclusive atmosphere is our selling point." "Then your business model is broken," Johnson replied simply, "and it's time to fix it." He turned to address the entire gym, his presence commanding without effort. "What kind of community are we building here? Is this just about looking good in designer gear, or is it about becoming better people?" The question hung in the air, challenging everyone present. Johnson continued, passion rising in his voice. "I've been in gyms all over the world, the best ones, the ones with real heart. They welcome everyone who's willing to put in the work. They celebrate effort over appearance. They understand that true strength comes in all forms." He gestured to James. "This man has shown more strength in his recovery than most people show in their entire lives. He's not looking for handouts or special treatment. He paid for a membership like everyone else. He just wants a chance to rebuild what he lost, serving his country." James stood straight despite his injury, dignity radiating from his weathered features. The contrast between his quiet resilience and Trevor's crumbling arrogance was impossible to ignore. Several gym members had moved to stand symbolically beside James now, a silent vote cast with their presence. Johnson looked directly at Trevor, his expression a mixture of challenge and opportunity. "You have a choice to make right now, not just about one man's membership, but about what kind of place this is going to be, about what kind of man you're going to be." The silence that followed was profound, heavy with anticipation. Trevor looked around the gym, at the faces of members who had once represented exactly what elite fitness stood for, but who now regarded him with disappointment and expectation. He looked at his staff, whose expressions ranged from embarrassment to open disapproval. He looked at James, standing proud despite everything, and at Johnson, whose presence had catalyzed a transformation that went far beyond one confrontation. In that moment, Trevor seemed to see himself as others saw him, not as the sophisticated gatekeeper of an exclusive world, but as someone clinging to artificial distinctions in the face of genuine human value. Something shifted in his expression, pride giving way to the uncomfortable beginnings of self-awareness. "Mr. Wilson," he said finally, his voice different now, stripped of its practiced condescension, "I owe you an apology." The words clearly didn't come easily to him, but they came nonetheless. "Your membership is valid, and you are welcome at Elite Fitness." A ripple of approval moved through the crowd, but Johnson shook his head, not satisfied. "That's not enough," he said firmly. "An apology is a start, but it doesn't address the bigger issue. What about the next veteran who walks through that door? What about anyone who doesn't fit your image of who belongs here?" Trevor hesitated, visibly struggling with the public challenge to everything he'd built his professional identity around. The gym waited, collectively holding its breath. A personal trainer stepped forward, breaking the tension. "What if we created a veterans program?" she suggested, looking between Trevor and Johnson. "Discounted memberships, specialized training. We have all this equipment and expertise. We could actually make a difference." Another staff member joined in. "I'd volunteer time for that. My cousin came back from overseas last year. It was tough for him to reintegrate." The momentum was building, individual voices joining to create something new. A wealthy member in his 60s spoke up. "I'd sponsor 10 veterans memberships right now. Who else is in?" Hands raised throughout the gym, a spontaneous pledge of support. The atmosphere had transformed completely, from uncomfortable confrontation to collaborative possibility. James watched in amazement as the very space that had rejected him minutes ago now reorganized itself around inclusion. Trevor looked at Johnson, then at James, then at his transformed gym. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a humility that had been entirely absent before. "Elite Fitness will establish a veterans program effective immediately," he announced. "Full access to all facilities and services." He turned directly to James. "Starting with you, Mr. Wilson. No charge." James shook his head, his principles evident even in victory. "I don't want it for free," he said firmly. "I paid for the standard membership, and that's what I want. Same as everyone else." He paused, then added, "But a veterans program for others? That I can get behind." Johnson grinned, clapping a hand on James's shoulder. "Respect," he said simply, the word carrying layers of meaning. He turned to Trevor. "You heard the man." Trevor nodded, something changing in his demeanor, the beginning of genuine respect, replacing the superficial courtesy he had hidden behind earlier. "Of course, standard membership, as paid." He extended his hand to James. "And if you'd be willing, we'd value your input on developing the veterans program." James accepted the handshake, his grip firm and decisive. "I know a few guys who could benefit. Good men, strong, but needing some help to get back on their feet." The resolution hung in the air for a moment, not perfect, not a fairy tale ending, but something real and meaningful taking shape from conflict. The gym members who had gathered began to disperse, conversations buzzing with new energy. Some approached James directly, offering handshakes and words of gratitude for his service. Others huddled in small groups, already discussing how they could contribute to the emerging initiative. Johnson observed it all with quiet satisfaction, the transformation of the space reflecting a deeper shift in perspective. He caught the eye of a young staff member who had been recording the entire interaction. "You got all that?" he asked, nodding toward the phone. The young man nodded, slightly starstruck, but understanding the significance of what he'd captured. "Yes, sir. Every word." "Good," Johnson replied. "Because this isn't just about one gym or one veteran. This is about remembering what really matters." He glanced over at James, now engaged in conversation with the trainer who had offered specialized rehabilitation. Some things are worth standing up for. 3 weeks later, James moved through his rehabilitation routine with focused determination, the advanced equipment at Elite Fitness allowing him to progress faster than he had in months of previous therapy. The specialized leg press had been adjusted to accommodate his specific needs, and the trainer, Sarah, a specialist in sports rehabilitation, watched his form with professional attention. "You've gained 5 degrees of flexion since we started," she noted, making an adjustment to the machine. "That's impressive progress." James nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes despite the sweat on his brow. "First time I've felt like my old self in a long time," he admitted, completing another controlled repetition. The gym around them had subtly changed. While the luxurious appointments remained, the atmosphere had shifted. A new section had been designated with equipment specifically selected for rehabilitation needs. A discreet but visible sign read, Veterans Wellness Zone, and several men and women, their military background evident in their bearing, if not their civilian clothes, worked through various routines. Trevor approached, his previously aloof demeanor replaced by something more genuine. He carried a tablet with program details. "The first official veterans session starts next Monday," he informed James. "We've got 15 confirmed participants so far. 2 physical therapists have volunteered their time, and we've had equipment donations from 3 manufacturers." James finished his set before responding. "Good," he said simply, but the approval in his voice was evident. "Those guys need this, not just the equipment, the community." He gestured toward 2 younger veterans spotting each other at a bench press, the camaraderie between them visible even from a distance. Trevor nodded, a new understanding in his expression. "I've been learning a lot these past weeks," he admitted, the words coming with difficulty but sincerity, about what strength really means, about what matters. He glanced around his transformed gym. "About the kind of place I want to run." From across the gym, the distinctive figure of Dwayne Johnson emerged from the free weight area, nodding in acknowledgement as he caught James's eye. Johnson made his way across the gym floor, exchanging greetings with several members along the way. The respect in their eyes was different now, less about his celebrity status and more about the stand he had taken. When he reached James and Trevor, he clasped the veteran's hand firmly. "Looking strong, brother," he observed, genuine appreciation in his voice. "That leg's coming back." James nodded, professional military reserve giving way to quiet pride. "Getting there. Doc says I'm ahead of schedule now." He gestured to the equipment around them. "Makes a difference having the right tools." "And the right people," Johnson added, glancing meaningfully at Trevor and Sarah. Trevor accepted the implicit acknowledgement with newfound humility. "The Veterans Program launches officially next week, but we've already seen an impact." He hesitated, then added, "It's changing the whole culture here, for the better." Johnson surveyed the gym, taking in the subtle but significant transformation. Regular members now trained alongside veterans, the artificial barriers of status and appearance giving way to mutual respect. What had begun as a confrontation had evolved into something neither side could have anticipated, a community defined by genuine strength rather than superficial standards. "This is just the beginning," Johnson said, the words carrying both satisfaction and challenge. "Elite fitness could set an example for gyms across the country." He turned to James. "And it started because one man refused to be turned away from what he'd earned." James shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with being cast as a catalyst. "I just wanted to get my leg working right again," he said simply. "Didn't expect to start a movement." "That's how the best changes happen," Johnson replied. "One person standing their ground for what's right." He looked around at the transformed space where exclusivity had given way to something more meaningful. Sometimes it takes someone willing to face rejection to create acceptance for others. The video of that confrontation had indeed gone viral, amassing millions of views across multiple platforms. But unlike many viral moments that flared and faded, this one had sparked concrete change. Gyms across the country had reached out to Elite Fitness, seeking guidance on establishing their own veterans programs. Equipment manufacturers had pledged support. A hashtag had emerged, #StrengthServes, connecting veterans with fitness resources nationwide. Trevor cleared his throat. "We've been invited to speak at the National Fitness Association Conference about inclusive programming and the Veterans Initiative." He glanced at James. "They specifically requested that you join the panel if you're willing." James raised an eyebrow, considering. "Not much for public speaking," he said. Then he looked around at the other veterans rebuilding their strength, their dignity, their sense of belonging. But I guess some things are worth speaking up for. Johnson smiled, recognizing his own words echoed back. As he prepared to return to his workout, he paused, addressing both men. "Real strength isn't about how you look or what you can lift," he said. "It's about standing up when it matters, about using whatever power you have to make things better for others." He extended his hand first to James, then to Trevor. That's the kind of strength worth building. As Johnson walked away, James returned to his rehabilitation exercises, moving with renewed purpose. Around him, elite fitness continued its transformation, from a symbol of exclusivity to a model of what was possible when people recognized true value beyond appearance, status, or circumstance. The weight still clanked, the machine still hummed, but the heart of the place had changed. And with it, countless lives would change too.